First of all, welcome to the very first THE-HR webinar. This is entitled Faculty Recruitment in MENA and COVID-19. I'm Nick Davis, Hiring Solutions Director here at the Times Higher Education, and a huge thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We've had over 100 registrations from nearly 30 countries, and that's within the MENA region and beyond, which I think speaks to the impact that COVID-19 crisis has had on universities and particularly on HR professionals around the world, and the great leveller that it is proving to be. So this series, which will include further sessions on legal hazards and onboarding taking place over the next 2 weeks, so do look out for further communications on these, was imagined and brought to life through conversations that we held with some of our partners in the MENA region back in March and April regarding the global threat of COVID-19 as that became more and more apparent. As international travel ground to a halt, social distancing was implemented globally and recruitment freezes were seen on the horizon, the question from our partners was how were they to approach recruitment, from gaining internal approvals through outreach, engagement, interviews, and all the way through to offering. What did best practice look like during these uncertain times? And where in the world was this being done best? To help answer these questions, and I hope a few more, we convened some, let's call them trendsetters in the world of recruitment, hailing from the UAE, the UK, and Canada. I'll be quizzing them shortly, but we would love to have some questions from you, the audience, as well. So please do use the Q&A button just at the bottom of your screens to ask a question to the panel. So without any further ado, let me introduce today's speakers. First up, on my diagonal left, we have Emma Stone, Executive Director of Human Resources at United Arab Emirates University. Emma recently joined UAEU as Executive Director of Human Resources, having completed a 6-year stint as Director of Human Resources at the University of Cambridge. Emma joined UAEU just prior to the start of the lockdown, and so provides us with some first-hand experience of being on board during the pandemic as well. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Michelle Wenham, Chief People Officer at TEDI-London. Michelle started her career in distribution and manufacturing in various operational and senior HR roles before moving to contracting to fit with family commitments. She then made the very deliberate move into services in the public sector, reflecting her personal values, working with organisations such as the police service, fire and rescue, before moving into the university sector. Having worked with some of the UK's Russell Group universities, she then took on the rather significant challenge of becoming Chief People Officer at TEDI-London. That's a higher education startup established by Arizona State, King's College London, and UNSW Sydney. Michelle has spent the last year building an employer structure, identity, brand from scratch. So we're really interested to hear from her as well. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
And last but by no means least, we have Professor Daphne Taras, Dean of the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. Daphne has been active in at the intersection of labour relations, public policy and law, with a particular interest in bringing multiple disciplines together on important labour market and workplace issues. She was expert advisor to the Federal Commission on Employment Standards, a member of the Saskatchewan Ministry of Labour's Advisory Council, and chaired the Education Relations Board of Saskatchewan. And thank you for including Saskatchewan on so many occasions here. Professor Taras has also published more than 80 journals, articles, book chapters, books, and journal symposia.
This can take, you know what, this can take the whole...
Let me just pick my favorite piece, Daphne. She was named as one of Canada's top 100 women and top 10 women of influence in Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan again.
In 2012. Daphne, welcome and thank you for joining us. So we're going to touch on many points as I pointed out earlier on. But Emma, I think I'd like to come to you first as our MENA incumbent, although you are actually back in the UK at the moment.
I am.
The weather certainly makes it feel like we're back in Al Ain. If you wouldn't mind starting for us, how has COVID-19 impacted recruitment in UAEU and perhaps across UAE?
Thank you, Nick. So yes, I am back in the UK at the moment. I had 3 months after sort of joining the university, getting embedded in the sort of recruitment processes there. So it's still relatively early days for me. But in terms of the impact on recruitment as I've sort of experienced it, we've obviously had to move to online recruitment very rapidly. Recruitment is a delegated activity in the university, as it is in many academic institutions. And what we're trying to do within HR is build up some specialist knowledge to support the academic functions as they recruit their new faculty. And the unfortunate thing is that we would have been recruiting really quite heavily over the last few months because we have a high turnover of faculty to start the new academic year in August. And all of the usual channels for doing that, interviews, conferences and so on, have obviously been on hold. So we've been relying very much on Zoom, on Skype, on WebEx to carry out our interviews, and that's great. You know, a lot of that has worked really well. We've also adopted a sort of policy of allowing recruitment to run for longer than we might otherwise have done, so keeping the application window open for longer. And we've just had to be really quite flexible about how we source our candidates. And in addition to recruiting, we've also had to think about the sort of contingency measures. So the fact that we can't recruit the 100 or so faculty that we need, we may have recruited 30 or 40. We've had to look at extending contracts of those that would otherwise have moved off, of recruiting locally more visiting faculty, and you know, just being a little bit flexible and a little bit agile about how we fill those gaps in the short term. And what we expect is that we'll then have a bigger recruitment exercise or a bigger onboarding exercise probably in January, all being well.
So you've seen some stalling there in the recruitment process. Yeah. Michelle, we've been working together for the past year or so, pretty much since you started at TEDI-London. You seem to have been more active than ever during COVID-19.
Yeah,
Can you talk us through that?
It's really interesting. As you say, a number of higher education institutions in the UK have done either recruitment freezes or very much slowed down. And we had a lot of discussions internally because some of the feedback we were getting anecdotally was, will we look insensitive in the marketplace, given that a lot of higher education institutions were and still are obviously dealing and reeling with the financial impact, not least, and furloughing staff and so on. So part of our recruitment strategy was, no, we're absolutely going to go full strong and need some great people. But we've also made a point of recognising the challenges and saying, we've thought about it, and actually we think this is good because we can give people in the marketplace jobs and we are still growing and developing and so on. But I think it was really important to us as our values. We don't operate in a silo, and we are talking to other colleagues in our network at other slightly larger institutions and ones that are in a bit more of a difficult position.
Right. And Daphne, I understand that you've been recruiting a fair bit as well, quite recently, up to 20 positions of late. Was that on your mind as well, a worry about insensitivity?
Not at all. I mean, maybe I have the benefit of being a business school, but you know, we can be a little bit ruthless. So I'm quite overt in saying I run counter-cyclical to the market, and I always have. So when other people are not hiring is when I go to the president of the university and say, please let me hire now. So this is a strategy for building your institution. Anybody who balks and freezes right now will not recover because they're going to lose a generation of talent. So I hired 16 the previous year. I hired 20 this year through COVID. My faculty, well, it's a very, very large faculty. So these numbers seem impossibly large for one faculty, but we have 12,000 students. But our problem has been that we're highly unionized. Like a lot of Canadian schools are highly, highly unionized. And so when we went to our union to say, could we extend people who were in, 3-year contracts, 1-year contract who aren't tenured, could we extend them beyond the 4-year cut point? The answer was no. So we've had to deal with some inflexibility, but basically we've been hiring like crazy. And we started before Zoom. So because of the seminar, I said to myself, I'm going to examine what I was doing before, and then I'm going to examine what I was doing during. And there was really no difference because we were in a culture of hiring. So any department, like Michelle and Emma said, it's a distributed responsibility, but the people to whom it was distributed, they knew their role was to hire because their colleagues had done it in August last year or in November. So they had to close the deals. And where we had to be sensitive was when we're hiring internationally, and I'll look to other people.
Exactly.
People can't get approval to cross borders. They have to go into 2-week quarantines. We don't know when they're arriving. We have to be very, very sensitive on teaching schedules. This is where universities are having to be agile. In the old days, if someone didn't show up on July 1st, that was grounds for termination. Now it's like, whenever you're safe, come.
Yeah.
It could be next year. We want you to be an employee of ours, but we'll wait as long as it takes.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting piece there, the bit about if you're safe and your well-being and so on. And I think that has to be more than just words, because it does have an impact on people's view of you as an organisation. So I completely agree, Daphne, around this is an opportunity as well, dreadful though the situation is, to get some great talent. But actually, you also have to balance the other side of, it's not just the individual you're recruiting. There's a whole kind of family impact going on and financial and all the rest of it. And you've got to spend that almost extra time working those things through and making the experience as personal as you can.
I agree, absolutely, because particularly where I am now, obviously for those moving internationally, it's a big move. It's a very different place for many people. And if candidates can't come and visit before they decide whether or not to accept an offer, then exactly the sort of care that you're talking about, Michelle, is so important. And we have I shouldn't suggest that we haven't been recruiting, we have, but the difficult bit for us is it's getting to offer stage, people accepting offers when they haven't had that opportunity to come and see the campus, to see the city, to see what opportunities it presents, which are great. So, that's the bit we're all looking forward to doing next.
And which I can attest to, having been out there on a number of occasions. I'd like to come back to that idea around how we're communicating with candidates, because I think there's a lot more around that, how we communicate. Even things like potential pay cuts, digital workload, well-being, as you pointed out, are really important. But just on the international, domestic side of things, and Emma, I'll come to you again first for a MENA perspective. Are we going to see more of a leaning towards national talent, domestic talent? There are lots of projects, Emiratization, Saudization within the region. Yeah. Will we see a boost for those projects because of COVID?
I think we will. I mean, certainly recently, as we've been looking to hire both faculty and professional staff, obviously we're limited, given the travel restrictions, we're limited to bringing those staff to campus. But I think it will be a balanced picture. There will always need to be a balance of the talents, both nationally, locally and internationally. And I think actually that's how the organisation grows. So yes, it will give a boost certainly to the Emiratization programme. But that's something that we do anyway, and it's important that we do that well, regardless of the limitations that COVID has brought about.
And Michelle, this has come at the perfect time for the UK. We're just off the back of Brexit, which closed our borders effectively to a number of people, and now COVID's shutting us down even tighter. Do you have concerns over the kind of calibre of international, or the number of international faculty you'll be able to bring to TEDI?
It's really interesting, actually. So we have moved. We were doing a summer school, and the summer school, we had to almost switch immediately from doing it physically in London to doing it remotely. And actually, in a weird way, it's been better, because we've been able to have 146 students from 21 countries. And we've also been able to get a much broader number of international faculty who've been doing project mentoring, masterclasses and so on, who might have struggled even without COVID to come to London for various reasons. So actually, and given the way that TEDI-London is looking to deliver their programme anyway, through a really blended approach and across time zones, I'm seeing some really good learnings and opportunities for what we've done from summer school, and thinking, as you said, Emma Jane, much more in an agile way about what works for the students. I think the one aspect we found for students, so they get, I think they've had a much more broad experience with lots of different international faculty, which has been fabulous. I think for them, it's the social side that's been less active, because, you know, I remember our summer school last year, the students would over weekend go to Amsterdam, and they'd be doing different things together. And the social aspect doesn't work so well remotely. The actual learning experience, I think, has been a really high quality, because we've been able to attract international faculty who are able to do things without the travel.
Yeah, and I think it's probably not a discussion for now, but in 2 weeks' time when we run our session on onboarding, I think there's going to be some real questions being raised around actually the social side and the quality of engagement that we have with new faculty members. Daphne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe about 3 years ago there was a piece of Canadian legislature that seemed to lump academic faculty in with service workers, which almost brought a halt to Canadian universities' ability to attract international and recruit international talent. Does that ring a bell? It
rings a strange bell. There was in Canada, we have to, in many in many competitions in which an international applicant comes out first, we have to do a great deal of bureaucracy and selling to the government as to why we couldn't find a qualified Canadian. And I seem to recall a couple of universities did a real blooper, and it put to a halt. There was a difficult, unofficial freeze where my perception is we were being punished for being a little too cavalier. But that may be what you're talking about, because I definitely remember a time about 6-8 months where don't bother hiring. You can't hire. You'll never get it done. Yeah. But I don't think it was legislation. I think it was a sort of an informal punishment.
Okay, my roundabout point and my real question there is, and I think you've answered it in part, is this going to be a real blocker like that period was, or is it simply we'll just wait?
We figured it out. It's not a blocker at all. In fact, we're finding it easier to do everything international right now. So, you know, as Dean, I'm able to have one-on-one talks with prospective candidates through Zoom. I get to know them. I ask bizarre questions, which disconcert them, which is great. What's your favorite fruit? And they go, you know, who is this crazy woman? Tell me the best piece of research you ever did. You know, just unexpected questions, and that breaks the ice much more. You have to do different questions when you're on Zoom. in order to get a sense of intimacy, right?
Yeah.
So that hasn't been a problem, and we encourage them now. There's a couple of things that are really interesting. We say you're not losing your networks because you can invite the people who would be your guest speakers in your classes now. We're doing a lot of coaching, right? So whatever your network is now, you can have them appear in your classes much more easily. So the students are getting networked with a much higher caliber of international speaker. You know, it's instant because everyone is at home waiting to be invited. You know, invite me to talk.
Yeah.
So the classes are becoming more interesting for students. Our attendance is higher by 20%. We're crazy for data. So we've actually been looking at the data on class attendance through Zoom and so on, 20% higher class attendance. The introverted student participates more. So it's not the extroverted, you know, bully look at me student who interrupts and asks all the questions. Now the chat function allows people who are more thoughtful to engage. And so we've seen some real positives. But the thing I was going to say about socialization, before faculty officially gets switched on, usually the academic year starts July 1st, at least in North America. And most of the people I hired, almost all of them, we are including in the town halls. We have now town halls with the dean. We never used to do that. We used to have faculty councils. So every 2-3 weeks, we have a town hall, and all the new faculty are now Zooming in. So they're getting to know each other and their colleagues and feeling a part of us probably 3 months before they are officially being paid, which really is a startling new behavior.
I think that's a really good point. I think this is, you know, this again has forced us to sort of break down barriers that might have been there, and sort of the formality around a lot of these processes, the interviewing process, the onboarding process, and people are, you know, approaching that in a much more fluid way, and that is actually much more inclusive as well, which is a real positive that's come out of this.
Now we're finding with staff much more inclusive.
Absolutely,
much more inclusive.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an interesting point about interviewing as well on Zoom and on these different platforms, because as you say, Daphne, it is very different. And I think one has to approach it differently so that the candidates feel comfortable and feel as though they can interact in a way that, you know, that they can sell themselves, but they don't have the same sort of nervousness often as if they were in a panel interview in a room. In many ways, I think they can bring the best of themselves more easily than maybe some of them would have done.
Look at our Nick not wearing a tie.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed. I thought nobody was going to mention it.
The three of us are not, but it used to be that people would be very, very formal. And now they're showing, I'm relaxed, this is who I am. And you can have a much less stilted discussion now.
Absolutely.
And Michelle, you were... Sorry, I was going to say you were telling me about digital etiquette when interviewing yesterday. I'd be fascinated to hear more about it.
Yeah, sure. So we've actually been saying to people, going back to the bit colleagues were just saying about relaxing people. So we've found a couple of things. One is the technical aspects of it is the bit that people seem to be most nervous about.
Yes.
And so we have made a point up front to say, do not worry, let's be flexible and agile with this. If it all goes down, we will sort it out. It won't make an impact on our decision making. And we've had all sorts of little tricky bits that have happened where presentations are trying to be shared and it didn't quite work. And so I think that when you're running them, you have to be able to think on your feet with the technical aspects whilst also reassuring the candidate that this is nothing to do with the decision making. The other thing we noticed, picking up on what you're saying about more informal dress, so actually I have found, particularly with gentlemen, that they are still dressing up for the interview. And again, we have made a point at the start to say, thank you so much for making the effort. Please feel free to remove your jacket. We want you to feel comfortable, etc. And I think that really works well. So you have that, just that little bit of informal touch base, housekeeping and things, and that starts the relationship really nicely.
But I find I have much less tolerance. Yesterday I was on a panel with international global PhD students who were asking questions about starting their first academic career. And some of them were like, you could see the forehead, you know, and I'm supposed to be hiring them to be in a virtual world right now, and certainly hybrid from now on. You know, we're going to be much more tolerant of students' work-life balance, of the need to be home, of, you know, the need for class participation is not going to be as high in person. So I look at all of these people and I think, how can you not have the intelligence to know how to deport yourself in the very medium that we're all going to be using for the next few months? So, you know, please, everybody, tell your prospective candidates, like, improve. I couldn't believe it. About 20% of them were awful. I mean, they don't have to be, you know, professional, Ted Rogers behind them and all that stuff, but like, God, the lighting of some of those people.
I'm just horrid then, because I had people like that, and I just said, I'm sorry, I can only see half your head. I mean, I will just say, because I just think you're right. Individuals should spot it themselves. Yeah. But I'm almost a little bit more empathetic because of the medium that I was
empathetic for 3 months. I was empathetic 2 months ago. I'm not empathetic anymore. My empathy is zero.
Remind me never to go for a job interview at TED.
No,
I'm terrified already.
But, you know, we have huge how am I supposed to hire an academic? We put them in front of a class of 150, 200, 300. Yeah. They can't even talk to me without looking like the criminal with the, you know, the voiceover when the television is speaking in a distorted voice, because, you know, they look like Deep Throat or something. It's just
oh dear.
That was a very good voice. I got fooled there for a second. Just to say that we've got some fantastic questions coming in from the audience. Please do keep them coming. We'll jump to them in a minute. Daphne, I wanted to just come back to a comment you made there about having some visiting speakers, the ease of getting visiting speakers coming in. And it inspired me a little idea around contracts and the types of contracts we were going to see coming in the future. And the THE released an article today that surveyed 200 university leaders. It asked them about short-term contracted staff and whether they'd be under the biggest threat of redundancy. Now, it was a bit of a split, actually, in terms of about 51% indicated that they wouldn't be under most threats. But Sarah Springman, the rector of ETH Zurich, went as far as to say that actually they'd be looking to extend those kind of contracts and potentially offer more of those contracts. Do you see more of those type of short-term contracts coming in this unstable environment?
No, I mean, not at my place, because I've been trying to, they were under tremendous threat before. So, you know, a lot of it has to do with the level of unionization and so on, but there was a lot of protection of tenure and tenure stream jobs. And it's a little bit like the Japanese industrial relations system, where you have the salary man who's very, very protected, and you have a cadre of very vulnerable workers who take the expansion and contraction. So I know that I'm contemplating doing a lot of very, very large section first year superb teaching online. My school has 78 sections of Accounting 101. And large sections, 78 of them. There's no consistency when we hire a bunch of these contract lecturers. If you have 78 courses and you're hiring, you know, 30 or 40 of them, you don't know at the end of the year to what extent the students are well trained. You know, the grades are all over the place, the quality is all over the place. I would rather see one giant, consistent, really high quality experience, and then let my very expensive, very precious tenured faculty, I think in England it has a slightly different word, precious, but I mean like a precious jewel. teach in smaller sections things that they're really expert in. So I can see us adjusting. I'm not adjusting because of budgetary pressures. I'm adjusting because COVID has demonstrated we can teach in different ways.
Yeah.
And either we go back to what was normal before, or we say, what works for the students now? What's the best thing for the students? And it may not be an army of people who have very little security. It may be the best of them, but it may not be. I would not, if my children said, I want to be a contract lecturer, I would say that's not a stable career choice.
Does that ring true for you as well, Emma?
I think we're in probably a slightly different position because we're sort of growing. We've got a big ambition to grow our research base, particularly at the moment. So the likelihood is that we will be recruiting faculty and postdoctoral researchers on fixed-term contracts for the foreseeable future. But that's while we sort of stabilise the new growth, and then we would look at the contracting model after that. So it's for a positive reason. But also picking up on the point around, the changing teaching style, we will need to look for different skills amongst our lecturers and our teachers. And many of those may come from adjunct faculty. For example, we're looking to build relationships internationally with other universities, and so I would expect that we'll have lots of those sorts of contracts coming up as well.
I agree totally with Emma. We'll be able to make deals. I'm looking at Michelle and TEDI, and I'm the Ted Rogers School, and I'm thinking to my students are earning TED points and they're eating at the TED cafeteria, and maybe we could cross-list courses and just take advantage of the name. But the one thing that I have to say that's probably very important is I think we may have to extend the tenure clock by a year or two, because faculty who are onboarding now are devoting so much of their time and energy to teaching that the ability to get their research done,
yes.
I mean, it's getting reviewed, it's getting sent out, but the ability to actually dig in and do it while you're coping with this new world, probably they deserve another year of consideration.
I think there are vast parts of the MENA region that do run on a similar tenure track program, so that advice there I think will ring true for them.
Yeah.
I'll jump to an audience question, and we've got one here from, and excuse me, I'm reading from my phone. We've got one here from Rachel Johnson. She asks, expat faculty and staff have felt stuck in their country of employment while borders have been closed. Have some now chosen to end their contracts and go home to protect against their separated families, to protect against being separated from their families again? Indeed, does this present a barrier to international recruitment? Emma, I'm going to pick on you again first.
I thought you might come to me with that. Does it present a barrier? I'm not sure that it does present a barrier long term. I think, I'm one of those people who's stuck at the moment, frankly. And okay, my contract's not coming to an end, but I'm unable to re-enter the country. So I kind of understand how difficult this is for people who are exiting the UAE at the moment, and they are going home to look after family and may not have a job to go to straight away. But as many institutions are continuing to recruit, I'm sure that will all sort of work out in the time frame. And the other thing is that once borders do reopen, obviously there will be a big push to recruit again. And so I think there will be, those faculty that have delivered well, have got good CVs, have got good publications and so on, there will be a big market for them to re-enter. But it's a worrying time. We can't avoid that. And I know it has been very difficult for some of our outgoing faculty because they're not able to travel in the way that they would want to.
Michelle, does that ring true for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're quite smaller scale than colleagues on the panel. So we have a couple of people who are international who haven't left the UK to go back to Australia or America. And that's just been personal challenge and professional. And so we've made sure that we've talked about it a lot. We've done support and so on. reassured them about taking extra time when they can travel, and we can work around that, etc. But as I said, because everything's moved online for us, that the proportion of international colleagues who were going to come over and do certain things, we've actually just ended up with more being able to deliver because they haven't been able to travel. So I kind of feel quite positive around that. The bit that I am more concerned about at the moment, I guess, is international students. What that looks like for intake. Less worried, weirdly, about the faculty side of things, because I think we are delivering where we're not having face-to-face lectures anyway, even when things are normal. We're actually feeling quite confident with some of our scenario planning that we will still be able to deliver a great student experience, even if next year there's still these big challenges around COVID and travelling.
Sure. A question here from Mahmoud El Matini. And Daphne, I think I'll pose this one to you first. How is the pandemic affecting the research process, either clinical research or basic? And I think you touched on it there with the tenure track and needing to ease off in terms of the timescale. But what's your opinion on that? And I've just realised we may have lost Daphne. Perfect timing. Well, as we have, there are in fact a couple of questions directly for Emma. So Emma, I'll come for you here. Is there an option that universities are considering for recruiting faculty without bringing them in the UAE? Offering online teaching, how compatible is that with UAE recruitment law? And that question comes from Sidra Shaheen.
Well, thank you for the question. The answer is yes, we are considering that. I think as we start to redevelop some of our teaching programs, that becomes much more of an option. At the moment, I think the university would prefer that people are on campus for some of their time. It doesn't have to be all of their time, because it is about being part of a community, and I think that's really important. And although a lot of the teaching will be delivered online, there will still be face-to-face teaching, and that's important. So the answer is yes, we're considering all of those options, and we need to, make sure that we stay the right side of the local law, clearly. But that is also changing. There's also starting to be some review of those processes to make sure that we have that flexibility, which will be very welcome, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come back to some questions from the floor shortly. But I wanted to actually jump back into, I suppose, the recruitment process. I think we came in further down the funnel. And actually, Michelle, you've been doing some fantastic work in terms of outreach and promotion, which Emma, you referred to earlier on, has been stilted in terms of conference attending and things like that. Michelle, how have you counteracted that?
So in terms of the recruitment process, so going back to what we were all talking about in terms of trying to integrate more and more of the personal aspects. So we've done practical things like informal interviews, talking about the role, talking about the organisation, making sure that people have just got a real feel for what the role is about, but also being able to see the recruiting manager and to be able to get a feel for them and their personality, their management style and approach. So we did it as a bit of a mini interview, which I kind of led, but the recruiting manager was very much about, this is me, this is what we're all about. And we had some really good feedback. We've had, with our campaign, we've had over 1,000 people applying for different roles. And on top of that, we also, for every role, again with the recruiting manager and someone else, a really informal opportunity for live chat. And one of the things that I found fascinating with that was front-facing roles, you found that individuals were really comfortable and enjoyed being on camera, physically asking questions. For the roles where there's, for example, more background, quality assurance, governance type roles, much more use of chat, much less willing to come onto camera, but still gave us great feedback afterwards about how useful they'd found it. They wanted it twofold. I think one was around getting people to really get a feel for us as individuals and as an organisation, but also to make decisions about whether it was right for them. And so we were starting to build connections already, and we had sort of 80, 90, 100, 120 people on those sessions. When you got into the more formal process where people were shortlisted, they were already, oh yes, I remember you. And there was those touch points back. And it's something that when we go back to whatever the new normal looks like, we're going to integrate some of those learnings into our standard process.
Yeah, I think, you know, certainly from what we see at the Times Higher Education, obviously we see thousands of adverts come across our path, and I think the work that you guys did, and in the follow-up email, I'll certainly be trying to include some of the content that you produced, Michelle, if you don't mind.
No,
I think it's a real example of best practice of how to personalise that approach, how to give candidates a real example of, you know, what the organisation they're going to work for is like. So I thought it was fantastic.
I think the one other thing we noticed different about candidates is the request for feedback. When you've made those personal connections, we have had significantly higher proportion of questions about the shortlisting and getting feedback, wanting to understand. Remarkably so, actually, compared to a standard recruitment process.
That may tie in with a question here from Arzu Aya, who says, do colleagues require additional processes to measure candidates' teaching skills? What kind of preparations should be in place at a time like this? So do you need more from them in a digital process, as well as them needing more information from you and asking for more qualification throughout the process?
We've asked for samples of people's online teaching, and people have been supplying us with YouTube videos of themselves teaching, or we might give a topic and say, how would you deliver 15 minutes on this? So we actually have looked at people's teaching this way, and they do a research talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, we similarly have asked some candidates, and this depends on the particular discipline, but to provide a sort of sample of their teaching, or to talk to their research topic, for example. And I think that's quite a nice way of opening an interview, because they're on their own territory then, speaking from a good place, and then you can go on to explore the more generic side of it.
I agree. I think the other thing that we've been utilising and will continue to do so is informal discussions with students. From experience, we've found that doing that and getting some feedback and seeing the interactions is then, when we've taken people on, you can actually see that feedback comes through. So we found that a number of individuals actually struggled to interact with students. And given that we're a teaching organisation rather than research-led, that was just an absolute no. You know, that whole student experience, no matter how qualified on paper, if those individuals can't properly engage with our students, they're not right for us. And so that's certainly something that we do when recruiting faculty.
Fantastic. If I can jump from teaching to research, and Daphne, it was a question I posed to you just before you left us. But how is the pandemic affecting the research process, either in clinical research or in basic? And this has come from Mahmoud El Matini.
It actually has fairly profoundly affected research in all ways. First of all, I know our engineering and science faculty were separated from their labs, and we had to develop an essential services protocol to bring them back, and with social distancing and so on, and there was a considerable interruption. But in the business schools, there usually are not labs, although we have a number of cybersecurity labs and social media labs and so on. People are really disconcerted, and 100% of effort went to teaching. And so people that were in the middle of their research had to pivot on Friday, the 13th of March. We had an announcement, and it was the great pivot. And then we had to do 44,000 exams online. And there was no professor who could have kept an eye on research during that time. Right now, because they know that the quality of their teaching, when it switched very quickly online, probably 80% of them had no idea how to do this. They're very, very concerned with the quality of their teaching now. So all efforts are on teaching. And to give you an illustration, we had a teaching workshop, how to do this new universe of teaching. We had space for 350 students, 350 professor students at Ryerson, professors to learn. And in 10 minutes, it sold out. And 700 people, 700 professors 750 have now been trained. But they're working on a new pedagogy for the first time, some of them in 30 years, in 40 years,
Fantastic.
in 10 years. But that is a huge interruption of the research brain, right? So everything they do, and I'll give you another illustration, cheating on final exams. How do you assess exams? And the degree to which students are posting pictures and doing chat rooms, and you cannot stop, all this notion that you can have internet proctoring and that will stop cheating is absurd. I mean, it's a completely new way of work. Yeah. So we're saying to our professors, how are you going to assess without using the big gotcha exams? Is there a different assessment tool? And so their minds their creative research brains are actually being employed trying to solve the problem of, if exams are not a reliable measure of student performance, what is a reliable measure? And that is a very teasing research question.
Yeah.
So yes, research is profoundly affected.
Yeah.
Is that the case at UAEU as well, Emma?
I think so. I mean, obviously people have not been able to come into the lab, so they haven't been able to keep their experiments running in the way that ideally they would have done. We have started to see people back on campus now, so they're picking up where they left off, but you can't drop an experiment and pick it up again in that easy way. It's not as straightforward as that. I think the other big disruptor, and this probably applies more in Europe than where I am at the moment, is of course research funding will be very severely impacted across the globe, and that's got to be a worry for research staff in terms of the continuation of their research programs. But the upside, I guess, would be that there will be a lot of postdoctoral research staff who are looking for roles, and so where research funding continues to flow, then there will be a fabulous market, I'm sure.
Mm. Mm. And I mean, out in the UAE, there's a lot more industry funding and government funding, which is the view then that that's somewhat more secure at this time?
I would say so. I mean, I'm still new to this, so it's not desperately familiar territory, but I haven't heard any major concerns on that front, and certainly the university where I am now is hoping to move into much closer collaboration with some of the industrial partners to generate that sort of funding, and that will be the diversification of our funding base is a big ambition at the moment.
Yeah. I would, oh, okay, we've got one more question through here. Will this pandemic enhance the opportunity for public health research, particularly in the UAE? That's a bit of a bespoke one, and I think we know who it can go to first. It's from an unnamed audience member.
Okay, so the answer to that has got to be yes. I know that, you know, within the university that there's been a very large number of researchers working on sort of COVID, putting out their research newsletters, and the clinical school, the School of Clinical Medicine, is working very closely with SAHA, the local healthcare provider, to develop much closer links in terms of the research and joint appointments for faculty as well, which is something I'm familiar with from the UK, but hasn't been the tradition in UAE. So I think this opens up a whole new ball game, if you like, for that joint working and for those research programs.
And Daphne, is there a concern then that health will be prioritised over other parts of university research, and that others may fall by the wayside because of it?
It's happening very quickly. Partly the universities are making available money for COVID research in all aspects. We had, I think, 80 grants available at our place internally. And then governments are throwing millions and millions of dollars at a race for the cure. And, you know, I understand that Britain is doing very well in the race for the cure, but, you know, we're giving you we're nipping at your heels. But what's the problem with the money that's flowing in is the industry money that's flowing in. If a company is going to be laying off its staff or has quiet secret plans to lay off its staff, it's going to have a very hard time making $1 million contribution to a university at the same time as it's laying off. So we're seeing a real screeching to a halt of research money because there's an unseemliness to making donations, and that includes student scholarships, that includes all kinds of money where donors are very reticent until they assess the health of their own organization as their first priority. So it's going to roll down and affect us. But your question was on health research, and the answer is people will get the publication rate of relevant health research looks like it's sped up dramatically. And all kinds of journals they're putting things, fast tracking COVID research through the review process because we're seeing publications on it. Right, ladies? I mean, it would usually be 2 or 3 years before we saw the first publication in a top tier journal. So they have to be racing, which means that professors opportunistically who have a COVID angle to their research will race ahead. But all they're doing is moving their toolkit. You know, they have a toolkit and they used to look at something and now they're looking at something else. And the toolkit will still be just as relevant. It'll slowly pivot back to where it recalibrates. It's opportunistic right now. Some of it is very heartfelt and they really, really, really want to make a difference. And some of it is, hey, I found an angle. The academic brain, always the same.
Hope there's not too many of them on the call.
If I've insulted you, so be it.
We have roughly 5 minutes left, and what I would like to do is throw our eyes and our minds forward to, it could be 6 months from now, it could be 12 months, who knows, it could be a couple of years, to a world post-COVID-19. And what are the positives? We've spoken about a couple of them, and I'll ask each of you in turn to give me at least one of your main positives that you're going to take from this time and that you're going to start implementing into your recruitment processes. And Michelle, I'm going to come to you first. Give you a chance to think.
Yeah, so I would pick 2 things. One around the actual personalising as far as possible the attraction and the recruitment process, and bringing in that level of informality because I think that provides much better both candidate experience and organisational decision making. And the second one, I'm thinking about the skills required going forward is going to be slightly different for teaching staff. And so I think what you're looking for in the marketplace is slightly different. And also being prepared to invest and develop your teaching and learning toolkit to provide that to people, because it's a different skill required for this more and more online learning across time zones and so on. And I think that there has been an assumption that individuals can pivot and immediately do the same stuff online, and that just is not true. And I think we just have to accept that and be prepared to change the way that we develop the skills and capability of our teaching staff.
Emma, to you next.
I think both of those are really good points. We'll certainly do some of that. I think in addition, again, being sort of relatively new to the function in the UAE, I think I will be looking at how we improve our branding as an employer, because that's so important for attracting, you know, the best talent, whether it's faculty or whether it's professional staff. So certainly some effort going into that, because so many more organisations will be maximising digital recruitment. So we've got to be able to keep pace with that. And the other thing is to retain this agility in the recruitment process that we've had to develop very rapidly. I think it's allowed us to move more rapidly through the process. Things that were sort of fairly cumbersome and slow, we're able to do more rapidly now because people are just getting with the programme. Also allows us to involve more people in the process, because you're not waiting for, you know, formal meetings and so on. You can just make sure that people are available for a quarter of an hour online. So that's something I would very much like to retain and build into a sort of reskilling people in terms of recruitment and selection skills.
Fantastic. And Daphne, finally to you.
I agree so much on what my colleagues have said. We also have taken the opportunity to create virtual groups. There's virtual cooking groups, virtual research where you just sit and write in front of other people on Zoom. My faculty and staff together have learned to create French onion soup. There's a new camaraderie. We have a video on it if you want to see it. It's very funny.
Great.
You know, there's a new pulling together. I think that the attitude is really the most important thing. Any school that has a very begrudging attitude, well, you know, if you wait, it'll go back, and, you know, we know this is a terrible time. It's a non-optimistic message. If you're a place that's pivoted quickly and you're seeing it as an opportunity, and creative people can get ahead in your place, and you say to somebody, you know, you can come to us and make a difference. We don't know how, but we're making changes. Now's a good time to join an organization that's willing to change. I think that inspires people to want to join you. But, you know, if you look like you're grinding your teeth at night, you're not an exciting employer.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your sentiments, and thank you to everyone, both my panelists and the audience who have joined us today. We really do appreciate it. Apologies if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, but we'll do what we can to follow that up in the follow-up emails. But for now, Emma, Michelle, Daphne, thank you so much for your time, and have a fantastic rest of the afternoon.